let's talk about two of the most infamous, most seismic crimes of the entire 20th century. You have the assassination of a president and a string of brutal, terrifying murders that basically ended the 60s. And for decades, we've been told these really clear, straightforward stories about who did it and why. When it comes to the JFK assassination, the official story is clean and simple. One lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, fired from behind. That's it. For the Manson murders, the motive was Helter Skelter, this bizarre twisted plot to kickstart a race war. And look, for over 50 years, these have been the accepted truths. But what if that's not the whole story? Not even close. What if you dig into the original case files, the evidence that's been hiding in plain sight, and it tells a completely different, and frankly, a far more disturbing story? Well, that's exactly the question that two incredible books, Best Evidence and Chaos, dared to ask. Okay, so let's start with the Kennedy assassination. The Warren Commission, the official investigation, concluded that all the shots came from behind President Kennedy. But what happens when the most direct physical evidence you have seems to scream the exact opposite? Now, we're not talking about some fuzzy photograph or secondhand accounts here. We're talking about the home movie that captured the entire assassination frame by shocking frame. And what that film shows is really at the very heart of this huge, decades-long controversy. It really comes down to something as simple as high school physics. If you're hit by a force from behind, you should be pushed forward. But the film, it clearly shows President Kennedy's head snapping violently backward and to the left. This one single visible fact is a direct challenge to the entire lone gunman theory. And the contradictions? Well, they don't stop there. Not by a long shot. The doctors in Dallas, the ones who first treated the president, they described a large exit wound at the back of his head. But just hours later, the official military autopsy back in Bethesda described that same exit wound as being on the right side of his head. An entry wound in his throat somehow magically became an exit wound. So how could the same body show two completely different sets of evidence? And then, buried in the FBI's own files, author David Lifton found this absolute bombshell. This is a quote from agents who were right there at the autopsy. Surgery of the head area. The thing is, no surgery was ever performed in Dallas. This raises a terrifying possibility that somewhere between Dallas and the official autopsy, the president's body, the single most important piece of evidence in the case, was actually tampered with. All right, so if the JFK case makes you question the physical evidence, the Manson case shows you what happens when the entire motive for a crime is built on the testimony of a key witness. A witness who, it turns out, was flat out lying. Meet Terry Melcher. He was a famous record producer, son of actress Doris Day, and he was the absolute linchpin of the prosecution's entire case against Manson. The whole Helter Skelter theory, it all depended on his version of events. You've probably heard the story a million times. Manson, the wannabe rock star, gets rejected by the big shot producer, Melcher. So, in a fit of rage, he sends his followers to the house where Melcher used to live, 10050 Silo Drive, for revenge. And this act of personal spite was supposedly the match that lit the fuse on his apocalyptic race war. It's a very clean, very simple motive. But here's the problem. On the left, you see Melcher's sworn testimony. Under oath, he says he never saw Manson after May of 1969. That's months before the murders. But on the right, well, that's from the prosecutor's own files, uncovered by journalist Tom O'Neill. It's a note saying Melcher was seen at the Manson ranch in September, after the murders. He lied, under oath. Just think about it. Why would Terry Melcher, who was supposedly terrified of this guy, go back to visit him right after Manson's followers had brutally murdered people at his old house? It makes absolutely no sense. And if Melcher's story is a lie, the entire revenge motive just collapses. And if the motive is wrong, then the whole official story is wrong. So you see, these aren't just little inconsistencies we're talking about. Both of these authors, after years and years of research, came to the conclusion that these contradictions weren't just mistakes. They were signs of a deliberate deception. Both Lifton and O'Neill, they started out just trying to make sense of the official record. But the sheer weight of the contradictions forced them to consider a much more disturbing possibility. That the truth wasn't just accidentally obscured, it was actively, deliberately hidden. To explain all the contradictory medical evidence, Lifton proposed this absolutely stunning sequence of events. First, he says the president's body was intercepted,
Second, the wounds were surgically altered to create fake evidence of a shot from the rear. And third, the altered body was then delivered to the official autopsy. Now, if that's true, it would explain how the Dallas doctors and the Bethesda doctors could both be telling the truth about what they saw, because they were looking at two different sets of wounds.
Now, in the Manson case, Tom O'Neill's investigation took him down a different, but just as shocking rabbit hole. He found that all these key figures and events surrounding the Manson family kept intersecting with top-secret government operations of that era. First, you have to know about something called COINTELPRO. This was a very real, very secret FBI program, and its stated goal was to disrupt and discredit groups they considered subversive, which, you better believe, included the entire hippie counterculture movement. And then you have MKULTRA. This was the CIA's infamous and also very real mind control program. We're talking documented projects where they gave LSD to people without their knowledge to see if they could control their behavior. And this was all happening in the same places at the exact same time as the Manson family was on the rise. And when you look at it through that lens, suddenly all these strange details start to click into place. The Helter Skelter story? It perfectly served COINTELPRO's goal of turning the hippie dream of peace and love into a violent, drug-fueled nightmare. O'Neill discovered that Manson's parole officer wasn't just some random bureaucrat. He was a government-funded researcher studying LSD. And Manson's own methods of control, using acid, using manipulation, they looked disturbingly similar to the exact techniques being tested under MKUltra. So when you take all this together, these findings force us to confront a really, really uncomfortable idea about the history that we all think we know. Now, it's so important to understand this. Neither Lifton nor O'Neill claim they have the final answer. They are not trying to replace one official story with another one. That's not the point of their work at all. What they do, and what they do so powerfully, is they demonstrate a method. They show the incredible power of just going back to the original files, back to the original witness statements, and asking the tough questions when the pieces just don't fit together. At the end of the day, whether you're talking about a president's assassination or a series of shocking murders, both of these deep dive investigations reveal the same unsettling truth. A simple, easy-to-digest public narrative can be constructed, and it's often done at the expense of a messy, contradictory reality that gets buried deep in the archives. And that leaves us with this one final, really vital question. When you have mountains of primary evidence that contradict the stories we've been told for decades, it forces us to ask, how do we find the truth? And what does it mean if the official record itself is just the first draft of a fiction?